Okay, topic for today is tips for playing with anybody. I think someone suggested this in one of the comments, or someone in one of my workshops sent me an email that was this question, but it's one of the topics that's on my list that I want to cover. And this applies to folks who maybe you're going to a lot of jams, and you're having a hard time at a jam, but you feel a whole lot more at ease with your team, or maybe there's someone on your team that's a little difficult, or someone in your community you play with every once in a while, and for whatever reason things are not gelling, or any other reason. So this is kind of a survival kit for how to basically play with anybody, even if you just kind of pulled them from the audience, or they're on their first class, or whatever. I think so. We're going to cover a bunch of different topics, but I think the first thing to go over is, like, whatever your skill level. I always think about, oh my god, Scott Adsit, who does this show at the Del Close Marathon, where he takes people out from the audience and he does a scene with them. And I did a show like that for a little while, where I took anybody from the audience, whether or not they had any improv experience, and I did a scene with them. And I did a lot of those reps. And at a certain point, I think the hallmark of like a really incredible improviser is, like, it doesn't matter who's opposite them in a two-person scene. That scene's going to be really good. So the reason why I mention that is, like, if you're having a little bit of a tough time, um, I would encourage you to take on like a radical amount of responsibility for, learning all the things that you can do to make that scene better, and to work on your own improv skills. If it's like only one person in the scene was doing everything right, you're probably going to get to a pretty good or pretty interesting scene. And improv is a very community connection focused way of approaching theater and comedy. So a difficult person, or someone who might not be who you typically play with, is actually a really great opportunity to just work on all of your fundamentals and get all that stuff out of the way. So yeah, I think that's like my very first tip, is to like enter into this kind of challenge with a lot of humility, and understand that like it's are 100% of Scott Adsit's like scenes with like someone from the audience, like, are they all like absolutely amazing? No. Was every scene that I did with an audience member absolutely amazing? No. Were there like crazy things that happened? Absolutely. But I would say, broadly, for the most part, you should be able to perform with anyone if you're at a pretty high level. And at that level, also, like, improvising with someone who's kind of difficult will just kind of like brush off of you. Like, you'll be like, nope, it was just not a great scene. I think if you are personally like getting very worked up about having a bad scene, that's something that you're going to have to work through and manage. And maybe I'll do a video on that later. But not getting tilted about improv scenes is going to be like a huge accelerator to your own growth, and also like being able to hop into the next scene with somebody with like a fresh pair of eyes, fresh perspective, which will like increase your likelihood of like more success. So yeah, first tip is around humility. Second tip here is your goal in a scene with somebody you don't normally perform with is not laughs. Your goal, I would say, is to make the best possible moves that you can. And this is just something I personally believe is like, especially if there's a really big, really warm audience, like improv teams, like we, like, and I love this too, like, the audience is so warm that you can get away with like the cheapest version, or you can do like a shortcut, or just make like pretty radical moves, and get pretty big laughs. But like in your heart of hearts, like, that you are technically not making, all the right improv moves. And I'm not saying like you should always do the technically perfect improv choice or anything like that. What I'm saying is, um, in those kind of really warm audience situations, you should just kind of be grateful for the fact that like the audience is so receptive. And so in this moment when you're not with familiar teammates and you're in a jam situation where people maybe are a little bit more like um, wary or something like that, or it's a small room with not a really big audience, I think, just saying like, hey, like, whether or not people laugh, I just want to make sure I nail these few technical things from an improv perspective really well. Um, and if you're like working on something, I would say that's like a great opportunity in a jam to just be like, you know what, in this scene, the only thing I'm going to focus in on is like grounded reality, or I'm going to have real emotional reactions, or I'm just going to say yes to everything. So I think setting aside the goal of like always getting laughs will also make those scenes with like difficult people a little bit easier to deal with, especially because you'll go in being like, hey, look, like this scene's not even about laughs. It's about me working on this other skill. And for a little bit when I was doing character work, I would sometimes like have a half idea of a character and I'd go try to do it in a jam scene to see how it would go over. And if it didn't go over well, it was like, great. Well, now I know that that jam character probably is like, I was kind of so about it because it wasn't a great character. So I think having a limited goal around what you want out of that jam scene and just making the best possible move will do a lot of good for you. Second, or I should say like third um, tip here is to instantly create space whenever you're in a jam scene. What do I mean by that? Um, Jam scenes tend to die when two people are just standing side by side and they're just going to like talk at each other. Giving an instant sense of space seems to ground both people and create like a sense of ease. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think it has to do with the fact that like if we're just talking in front of an audience and we're just standing next to each other, we're now suddenly doing like two-person stand-up, and it feels less theatrical, and the audience is not as like involved yet, right? Because it feels still like a blank canvas. So even as something as simple as like putting your hands on a counter, leaning on a fake desk, opening up a closet, chopping a vegetable, any of the stuff that gives you a sense of space can be immediately helpful to be able to, instead of having to say like we're in the kitchen, making that kitchen move, or even saying like, hey, all we have to do is sign these documents, and pushing paper across the table to somebody. Another thing that you can do here to create a sense of space is hand somebody an imaginary thing. So you can even just be like, oh my god, can you like take care of my baby for like 2 seconds? I gotta do something really quick. God, what a scene that would be if like you hand the baby and you're like, I'm gonna rob this bank and I'll be right back. Um, but so this idea here of like giving somebody like space for an object also clears out their mind of like everything they were thinking about on the back line. So we're suddenly here, we're right here in this spot, and it takes some of the anxiety out of the scene because now we have this like thing that's happening immediately in front of us and gives us a sense of presence. And anxiety and being in your head is a surefire way to feel disconnected from your scene partner, disconnected from the audience, and for the scene to sort of like start to peter out. So just taking that quick moment at the very top, even if it means turning away from your scene partner or whatever, to grab an object or to give us a sense of space is immediately like very, very helpful. All right, fourth tip here. try to say yes and add only 3 to 5% more information. This is not like super scientific, it's not very mathematical sort of thing, but I like to use that number 3 to 5%. It's just like really, really like a tiny amount of information, maybe even like 1.5% to 3%. Might be more like a good sense of like how much more information to add. The reason to do this is because early improvisers and improvisers who are difficult and folks who've never done improv before are usually very bad listeners. And not necessarily because they're bad listeners in their lives, but being in front of an audience and suddenly having this pressure of like, you gotta be funny or entertaining or do something or whatever is not something most people are immediately accustomed to. So what we want to do is only give them so much information about the scene at a time so that they can fully say yes to it. And as the more kind of seasoned improviser, if you are a more seasoned improviser, for you, you'll hold the scene up by capturing as much of the information and maintaining it and keeping it alive and reinforcing it and recycling it, right? So if someone calls themselves your uncle, you want to be like, Uncle Sean or whatever. So we don't want to drop anything, but we use this as an opportunity to lighten the load on our scene partner and for ourselves to personally make sure we take in everything that this person is saying, and later on we'll work on how to action on it. So what this might look like in a scene. Someone, your scene partner might be like, I know, it's been such a long time. I'm glad that you met up with me at this Italian restaurant. I just, and, they might go on for a little bit. And then for you to just be like, yeah, it's a great Italian restaurant. It's been a few years since our divorce, right? It's just one line, and then kind of let them move forward, right? So we wanted to say yes to some. We don't have to say yes to everything that they said immediately in the next line, but we want to just kind of like acknowledge it. Yep, totally. And then we want to add just enough information for them to be able to take it in and think about it without having to suddenly take on like a huge deluge of new information. So a bad version of that would for you to be like, yeah, we haven't seen each other after you divorced and had 2 kids, and the 2 kids, one of them ran away and the other one turned into a pig or whatever. One was name was Michael, one was named Adam. Like all of this will suddenly turn into like a wall of information for your scene partner to take in, and chances are they'll drop some of that information. And second of all, you've kind of doubled your workload because that person might not remember everything that you said, and you might not remember everything that they said. So now we have a scene where lots and lots of things are being dropped. And I would say generally, this is a great tip for improvisers always. Is say yes and add 2 to 3, 2 to 5% more information, right? Just enough to get us to the next line. We don't have to do the whole premise or have the whole scene immediately at the very top, especially if you're not doing premise style improv. This also gives you one other like sneaky extra benefit, which is like if you're only adding 2 to 3% information, you can kind of feel out the other person. Are they really shy? If they are, then that means you can really take the lead and kind of lean forward as much as possible. If they're going to make a lot of crazy moves, they're probably going to make those crazy moves in the first few lines. So great, like let's watch them kind of like go ham, go for it. And if they really go for it, we're just going to have to like grab on and go with them on that ride. And you'll also get a little bit of a pulse, a sense of like who that person is as like a human being, like even not their character, like not even as an improviser, and that will give you more avenues to understanding them and playing with them in a much more like fundamental way. if you try to focus too much on each move and what their move means, you'll get kind of lost, because that person is probably not performing or playing move by move. They're kind of like using their intuition. And so we want to meet them at that level, at the level of like their intuition, who they are broadly as a person, how they see the world. All right, fifth tip. Ask lots of questions. I know that this is like an early improv rule is don't ask too many questions. And I will say, like, I'm a big believer in asking the right kind of question. Maybe I'll do a video about this. I think questions are extremely powerful in an improv scene if they do the important work of adding more information. And I think there are lots of techniques for doing that. But for this video, all you really need is to have like an extra layer of curiosity. It kind of doesn't matter what the nature of the question is, but I would just say what you're really looking for is to learn why this person is saying this to you. So the two things that you really want are like, what are they feeling? And to get them to agree to that feeling. And second of all, why do they feel that way? So if someone in that divorce scene is kind of being casual, yeah, I made it at this Italian restaurant, right? Divorce. You can kind of just be like, yeah, like, seems like you're really doing well, right? Like you're kind of like, this is, feels like it didn't hurt you at all. No big deal, right? Notice how it gets that person to explain why they're behaving the way that they're behaving, right? Gets them to like acknowledge a feeling. And even if they reject your idea, right? Even if they go like, no, it did hurt me deeply. This is just how I cope or whatever. Great. So now we've learned, yes, no, they do. Yes, they do have this feeling, or they do not have this feeling. They could just be like, yeah, I'm doing really, really well, actually. You know, like our breakup, greatest thing that ever happened to me. So great. Now we know what they're feeling. Now we know why they feel that way. And now we have a strong sense of who that character is. And what we want to do then is repeat it back to that person and get them to acknowledge how true that is. So, and you can do this like human beings seem to naturally do this, is like in your day-to-day life, just to be like, what's it called? What's it called? Maybe you notice somebody is like really like is tugging at their sleeves. They have like a dress shirt on, and you can be like, are you a little nervous? Is that why you're like tugging at your sleeves? And you'll instantly get like a yes or a no, right? Or they'll be like, no, I'm not nervous. What really is just like I just bought this shirt, it's so crisp and it's really nice. So we got what we wanted, which is we got their feeling and we got why they're behaving the way that they're behaving. Try this in your normal day-to-day life. I do it all the time. Most people don't react in like a way where they're like, how dare you? Usually most people are like, oh, you noticed me. Like, that's nice. That feels good. I feel seen. And that also translates in to a jam scene, because that person now feels like their idea is being listened to. And people who feel like their ideas are being listened to feel like their jokes are being given real opportunity. And when that happens, it kind of turns into this like virtuous cycle. Also gets us out of like the headspace of like judging someone for having like a bad move, you know. And there are bad moves. I hate to say that. I hate to be like, you know, uncool teacher there, but like there are moves that are less than ideal, but questions that are genuinely aimed at being curious about the other person will usually produce like a really great result. So long as like it's not like, you know, you're not asking the question like sarcastically or like in a mean way, like why would you think that, you know, that'll put someone in a defensive place. But like a genuine soft place of like, that is interesting, or like, um, yeah, I feel the same way. Usually gets them to tell you about what their character deal is and what their point of view is, and anybody who does like game style improv or even like Chicago style improv knows that that's an absolute gold mine once we understand like a character's point of view. Okay. Uh, the I'm gonna do these last two tips in the other order because I feel like okay. So whenever we're asking lots of questions, the other thing that we can do, this is another technique, is what I like to call, like people call it peas in the pod. I always call it you and me, we're the same. I love this exercise, and I this is another one of those things where you can do it with like, people in your day-to-day life, especially strangers that you meet. Just be like, I agree with you. I'm totally with you. And people do this all the time. I think if people, whenever they're like talking about politics, like especially if they're like, hey, we're in different parties or like we have the different, you could be like, yeah, but we ultimately want the same thing. So, right? But in this situation, what we want is to hit that at like an extreme. And you and me, we're the same, right? We're peas in the pod. So if the other person is like, yeah, I'm doing really well after a divorce, I would say one of the strongest moves, especially with a difficult improviser, a new improviser, a jam, or stranger, or whatever, is to immediately go like, me too. Honestly, me and you, we really did not belong together. That was, what a huge mistake. And for both of you to kind of sit in that and be like, me and you, most people don't like divorce. I would get married to you just to divorce you again, to be honest. Whatever that looks like, maybe it's like two people who really love paperwork and negotiating over how to split assets or something. But in any case, you and me, we're the same. Let's see, in my notes. Is a great way also of sharing the load with the other person. Whenever we're adding 3 to 5% more information, it becomes way easier when we're like, me and you were the same. So if we're sitting next to each other, we might be like, of all the lifeguards that I work with, you're the person I feel closest to. I feel like we're just vibe. And if that person is sort of like, I just know that there are aliens. Like, I haven't seen them, but they are there. And for you to be like, totally, right? And like the government, they wouldn't tell us if there were or weren't aliens, right? And like, there are billions of stars. And the other person goes like, yeah, so there's gotta be billions of planets, at least millions of planets. There's no way we're the only civilization. Do you think they visited us or whatever? Notice how like it's almost hard for like it's hard for me even to understand like when I'm starting one person's line over another, and that's because you're building one character together with a singular point of view. And so before, when we were like, hey, you can ask lots of questions, this is another place where you can ask rhetorical questions. So you can be like, sure, lots of people think that believing in aliens is kind of cuckoo, but like not me. What's it called? And not any of the hundreds of people I meet at a conference each year when we talk about whatever, right? So in this situation, you kind of ask the question and answer it yourself, or like, some people say, "Do you think the aliens are scary?" And I go, "Nope, friendly aliens." And what you'll notice is the other person might not know that you're peas in a podding them, or might try to find like a place of like distinction with you. And you can make those choices, like whether to agree with them or not. And I think the other person goes, well, yeah, but one thing is you think the aliens are green and I think they're gray. And for you to be like, actually, I agree with you. You made some really great points the other time we talked about this. Or, no, I would just say like that's probably the safest and coolest move to make, is like try to dissolve any kind of argument and immediately just kind of go like, yeah, like me and you, man, like we feel the same way, we think the same way, um, and it has this cool effect of like disarming the other person. So even if like the thing that is the character point of view is like a little embarrassing, like I don't know, whatever. It's like we're two people who are like I don't know. I don't want to say that anything's embarrassing because like yeah, we're all different people, but it's like um, you know like me and you, we like making videos of ourselves. I don't know, farting into jars and smelling them or whatever. Uh, the comfort of having you also say that will keep them from having this sort of like instant reaction of like, oh, not me. I wouldn't actually do that. Um, just because most human beings, like unless they have a lot of comedic training, try to like avoid being humiliated on stage or whatever. And it's only like seasoned comics where after a while you go like, but everyone knows it's the character, so I get to say whatever I want, and I can be kind of a jerk, and that's kind of the fun of it. So that's another thing there. So uh, that tip was just, hey, me and you, we're the same. Try to build on top of them and try to agree with them on their point of view and build on top of their point of view. Okay. Um, uh, the last thing is managing negations. Negations really frustrate people a whole lot, especially when you're learning kind of the fundamentals of improv. You're like, hey, you didn't yes my idea, and that sucks. And especially if you thought your idea was very funny. Yeah, this hurts. This hurts because nobody likes being like not listened to, but also it can be hurtful when you're like, I'm doing my best to listen and I feel like I'm not being listened to. So take a moment with yourself and acknowledge like there's like a human element to it, which is like, yeah, man, like that is a little bit of a bummer. Hopefully next time we can explore your idea a little bit more, or whenever you're in a troupe with people who you really jive with, like maybe that's a better opportunity to feel kind of cradled by a team that like really makes you feel listened to. But I think in this situation, in jam situations when you're improvising with new people, my best advice is to not let go. Um, what's it called? As much as you possibly can, whatever you thought the thing was, don't let go. So, um, unless it's like, hey, we didn't fully like articulate. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. This is one of my favorite examples. Someone starts a scene by doing this, and another person comes in and goes like, hey, stop tickling my baby. That sometimes feels like a negation to people because they're like, hey, this is typing clearly, and like, who tickles a baby like this? I hate you. But I would say in that situation, you were not negated, right? You did a little physical thing, the other person labeled it as something, and so now your best move, your best possible move, which remember is the goal, is to immediately agree with that person and go like, yep, I am tickling this baby. Other kind of negation is like someone goes like, hey, Sam, and the other person goes, my name's not Sam. Right? Or what's it called? Yeah, I love a strawberry daiquiri, and that person just goes like, that's not strawberry daiquiri. In those situations, I would say, like, cling onto it, because you don't want to like abandon your ideas, and you don't want the other person to kind of like get in this habit of like generating ideas and then abandoning them. We want to conserve as many ideas as possible and keep them all in the air. But if we enter into a headspace or a scene space where things are or aren't true and are or are not happening or whatever, we're going to spend a lot of time trying to manage what is true, what's crazy, what's not crazy. So I think in this situation, um, like if someone's like, my name's not Sam, and for you to be like, no, we met. You told me your name. I can't be crazy. you're Sam. And I would even triple, quadruple down sometimes and like pull out your phone and be like, I took a photo of you. I put it in my phone. I called you Sam. Is this nuts? Am I crazy? Um, yes, you're gonna have a lot of dull scenes, right? Like you're just gonna have to make hay sometimes, um, um, and once you've kind of explored it enough, you can also like rest it. But I think it's really important whenever a negation happens to fully acknowledge it and like take it to its conclusion, because sometimes there's something there, right? So in the case of like, I took a photo of you, your name's Sam, and for that person to be like, oh, I have a twin. If you go like, you have an identical twin, yeah, 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 yeah. Why didn't you say that earlier when I was, or if someone just goes like, yeah, I told you my name's Sam because I thought you were gonna ask me on a date or whatever. So it's like, well, great, like um, that explainer will give us jokes or the scene, but at least for a little bit, cling, cling to whatever it is. Like if you're sitting in a car and you do this, and someone just goes like, what's it called? Thanks for having me in your office, and you'd be like, yep, yeah, and thanks for sitting in my like model Ford Bronco that I have sitting in my office. But let's go over to my desk or whatever. Try to make both things true. Try to find inventive ways of clinging to your idea and letting them fully have theirs, and exploring what it could be that made that difference in like understanding. And once you fully explored it or explained it or whatever, um, that let like move on, move to the next thing. Okay, or if you find out like, hey, it's a total dead zone, but you still have to do the work of like, hey, we sat with the reason why we have a difference in perception. We're gonna move to the next thing. Okay, I know this is a lot. How long is this video? Ooh, 30 minutes. These are turning into like freaking podcasts. But I also, you tell me. You can always tell me about what you think about like the format and whether or not you want things to be longer or shorter or whatever. But all of these, like it's a lot of stuff to take in. So I would say, like, again, just like at the very top where we're like, hey, like, what should we do for what should I do with this jam scene to make this jam scene the best possible one? And it could just be like, hey, I'm just going to say yes, and add only a little bit more information. Or my only goal is to create a sense of space and intimacy or whatever. You don't have to use all these techniques all at once. What you want to do is, try out the ones that work. And keep in mind, like, the biggest thing here, which is, like, there are lots of techniques to use. And like in an improv scene or improv show, like if you're not having fun, you're kind of the asshole, and you have to figure out what it is. And sometimes, like for me, I've been on a part of teams where I've been like, I just don't want to be on this team anymore. I just don't like it, for whatever reason. You find another team and you like suddenly feel like you're good again, or you're just like, hey, like, what's it called? I'm kind of not having fun, so I'm gonna try to find this new way of having fun. So I had one person who just like always screamed in every scene. It's just like a big yeller, just loved yelling in every scene for whatever reason. And I was just like, I'm gonna find as many different ways of putting him in situations where he can't or shouldn't yell and make that the scene. So I'd like stick him in libraries, I'd put him in a funeral or whatever, right? He just loved yelling, and I just, for whatever reason, flipping that on its head made it more fun for me. It was just like, hey, that's just how he is. And that made me kind of feel like I was having fun, and it made me feel like less of an ass. So yeah, like keep exploring. These are just some techniques that you can use to make your jam scenes and performing with like kind of more difficult people easier, or early improvisers if you have a bunch of years under your belt. And let me know how it goes. keep it loose, have fun, and I think that's basically the end of the video here. Um, okay, yeah. All right. Good night, everybody, or day. Oh, oh, I should probably also say, like, like, comment, subscribe. I'm gonna try to do these videos like at least once a week. Now that I have like a setup that I kind of like a little bit more, I was trying to do these off my phone, and they weren't so great. And if you have any questions about anything I said or want examples or whatever, that'd be great. And oh, I said this last time as like a pitch, but if anybody ever is interested, I'll like, or they have like an improv show or something that they want to upload onto YouTube, and I'll kind of give it notes or like kind of break it down. Like that would be kind of fun. In any case, y'all have fun.